There are a lot of design patterns out there, and in this series I'm going to cover the design patterns that are easiest to understand and implement. The builder design pattern is one of them. Now, I had a colleague who went on a job interview, and they asked him, "You've been using Laravel for a while, where have you seen this design pattern being used? Or where have you seen any design pattern being used?" At that moment, he didn't have an answer. So in this video, we're first going to find out how to create the builder design pattern. Then we're going to look at Laravel and see where Laravel is using that design pattern. I'm just going to give you a bird's eye view of it. Eloquent is using the builder design pattern. Also, collections. Collections has been famously referred to as array on steroids, and all it does is it gives you methods to run on top of an array, so this way you can get much more done. But needless to say, it's using the builder design pattern. Also, I've created a request class, and if you've been using Laravel for a while, you're probably familiar with it. If you're not, don't worry. I'm going to scroll down, and in this area, I'm creating a validation rule. I'm saying I want a password, which should have at least 8 characters, letters, numbers, and so on. And all of this is using the builder design pattern. This is a bird's eye view of how we're going to approach learning the builder design pattern. We're going to have a lot of fun with this. So come along. Hit that subscribe button. So what is a builder class? Here I'm calling the user class, and then I'm calling the where method on it. When I call this method, I'm telling it which type of where clause I want. Then I call the where method again. This time I'm passing in different arguments, because this time I want a different where clause. Finally, the order by and limit. When I call this method, what it does is it takes all this information and then it builds me a query. Now instead of calling the get, I'm going to use a different method. I'm going to say to SQL because I want to see the query which has been built. I'm going to go to my browser, and when I hit refresh, I see the query that has built out. So what I did was I called one method after another, and I told it what I wanted to build. You see, the builder pattern was named that for a reason. You can build what you want. And in this case, step by step or brick by brick, we told it what we wanted to build for us. We can finally call the last method, which is referred to as the build method. Now you can label it anything you want. You can label it get, to SQL, anything you would like. However, this is referred to as the build method because it's going to take all the information you've given it and build something for you. In our case, it's building us a query, the exact query that we wanted. If I go back and I turn this into a get, it will first turn all this information into a query, run it against the database, and give me back the results, where you call the methods in the class. And step by step, you tell it what you want it to build for you. And once you're done, you call the build method. Again, it could be called anything. In this case, it's to SQL or get. But in the end, it's going to build out what you asked it to do. Now let's take a look at the collections class in Laravel. I have created an array, and I'm going to pass it into the collect helper. It's going to create a collection class object for me. And against that, I'm going to call the pluck method. I'm going to say I want the name plucked out of there. Then I'm calling the map method. And then once I'm done, I'm telling it build it for me. Again, this time it's labeled all. Again, you can call this whatever you want to, but what it's doing is taking all instructions you've given it, and then it's going to build out what you asked it to do. This is referred to as the builder pattern. So again, the builder pattern is where you take a class and you call its method one after another, and you build out what you want, and then finally you call the build method. Now let's take a look at the request class. I have created a request class, and in this request class, I've created this validation rule for passwords. Now in this one, I'm saying that I want a password minimum 8 characters with letters, numbers, and symbols. What I'm doing is I'm telling it step by step what I want. So hopefully by now you realize you've been using the builder pattern all this time and you're comfortable using it. Now that you're comfortable using it, let's try to build one ourselves. We are going to try to create a simplified version of the ORM ourselves. And when we do that, we'll understand much more about it, how to create the builder pattern in case we need it in the future. So I've created a class called MySQL Basic Example. By the way, a link to all this code is going to be in the description, so don't worry about it. Right now, I just want you to follow along and get the main idea. In this class, I've created a property called query, and in the reset method, all I'm doing is turning this variable, this property, into an object. So what that means is I can basically say, take this query, add a property called test to it, and then put any value I want inside of it. So I've turned this property into an object, in case you weren't familiar with std class, which you don't have to be. So then I scroll down and you can see there's a select method. You pass me the table you want to work with and then the fields you want to see. In this case, what I do is I take the query object and I add a property called base to it. Now the fields you want to see, you have probably passed them in as an array. I implode those, join them together with a comma. Then I say from whichever table you want it to get. Now at this point I built out a simple select query. Let's look at another method, the where method. Just like Eloquent, I've created a where method. In this case, you tell me the field you want to see, the operator, which could be an equal to sign. So you could say where ID is equal to or ID is greater than equal to, and then whichever value you want. So it could be ID is greater than or equal to 2. And then this is being passed as an optional. Do you want to join the where clauses with an and or with an or? Now in this line, I'm checking if you're joining the queries together. You could be multiple where clauses with an and, or you're joining them with the word or. Then I actually add them to my array, and I'm just collecting them one by one. If you don't understand this line of code, don't worry about it. This is not really the main point. Now in the next method, I've created an or where clause, and what it's basically doing is calling the where clause, but I'm passing the word or in there, meaning I want to join this where clause with the or operator. Now, in the next one, I've created a limit method, and I'm passing in the start and offset methods. So I'm really just building the limit clause. Lastly, after all these methods, I've put down the build method. Now I've labeled this build method getSQL, but what it's really doing is going to take everything I asked it to build and put it together. In this line, I'm saying, did this person give you a where clause? If he did, then build up the where conditions. Next, I'm saying that did this person ask for a limit? Did he ask you to build the limit clause for you? If he did, then build the limit clause. Lastly, I return what I have built for this person. That's what this class is doing. So it's a class with methods which you can use step by step or brick by brick to build up whatever you want. And when you're done, you can call the build method, which is labeled getSQL in this particular instance. So I'm going to go to my code in leave controller, and there's a method called call method example. In this case, I've taken the MySQL basic example class. Now I'm going to create an object of the class we just built. And this object I'm going to use to call the select method. I'm going to pass in the users table. Then I'm going to say, okay, get me the ID, the name, and email. Next, I take that same object and then again call the where clause and give it a condition with the or where. I do the same thing and I do it again. Again, step by step or brick by brick, I built up what I wanted. Once I was done, I told it to build it for me. And I can label it anything I want, but I'm asking to build this for me. Now finally, I take what I've been given and I print it out. This, in case you're wondering, is just a very basic blade that I built up. I'm going to show you right now. All it does is print out what I asked it to. So you're not really missing anything. And now you can see that it built up exactly what I asked it to build. That's what the builder pattern does. In this case, it's saying that here are the attributes I wanted from the table I wanted. Here are the where conditions. And lastly, the limit clause. So the builder pattern is having a class where you have methods, you have options on what you want to build. Sometimes I want to put in the where clause, there'll be times I don't want it. And I can easily just take this out. I'm going to save, I'm going to refresh, and now it's giving me only what I want it to show. And now it's built a query with only the steps that I wanted it to build it with. I can go back, I can put in the where clause, or I can take them out. Before we close this section up, there's one important thing I want you to realize. I'm going to paste in the Eloquent code in here. I want you to notice the difference. In this case, the where clause, we call the class, and then after that we call the method, and then the next method was chained to it, and the next method was chained to it. Now you look at our code. I created an object from the class. I had to use this object each time I called the method. I'm doing this on every single line. You can see that I'm using the object again and again and again. How do we go from this, which looks much more bulkier, to this approach? Let's work on that. I'm going to copy this code, the first 2 lines, and then I'm going to comment this section out. So what if we took out the semicolon and said, hey, instead of calling the object, why don't we chain it the way we do in Eloquent? This should work. Automatically you see the red line and you see this error. It's saying call to a member function where on null. Now why would it say that? It's saying that you're trying to call where on a null object. So what does that mean? Let's go to the select statement. In the select method, I add my value to the base property. But after that, I don't return anything. So we go back, when select is done running, it's returned absolutely nothing. And on absolutely nothing, we're saying there should be a method called where, which of course is going to give us an error. So let's go back and let's see what we can do. On the select method, once we're done, we can go to the next line and say, I want you to return this. Now this is a reference to the object which has been created, which was used to call this one. So when we return this, we're just really returning an object. And now when we go back, the red line is gone, meaning that we're not getting an error, because when the select is called, it returns this. This is a reference to the object we have created. So now this method can easily be called. I'm going to go to the where method and do the same thing. In fact, I'm going to copy this, go to the where method, skip a line, save. I'm going to do the same thing with the other methods one by one. I'm going to save. I'm going to go here and save, all except for the last one. In the getSQL, the build method, I want it to return something that it has built. I don't want a reference to this object. I'm going to go back to my code and let's just copy everything else in here. Let's copy it to this point, paste it here, and let's take out the comments. Let me just figure this out here. I'm going to go here, remove the object because I no longer need that. Now if you look at our code, you'll notice that this method is chained to this one, it's chained to this one, and so on. Similar to the way Eloquent was doing it. It was calling one method which was chained to the next one, next one, next one. And this is an important part of the builder pattern. It's good to chain them together. Look at how easier, or look at how much more nicer this looks. Also, you don't have to keep repeating this. It's less effort. There's one thing I forgot to do, and that is this part right here. We could put getSQL at the very end of it. So I'm just going to take all this part right here, hit backspace. Now when I save it, it's built out the query. But this, now it's built out the query. Let me copy out this part right here, and I'm going to put that variable right here. Let's follow this code again. An object is created from the MySQL basic example class. At that point, I go and call the select method, which returns the this pointer. This is a reference to that same object we have here. Now because that's what's returned, I can call the next method. This allows me to create the method chaining that I wanted. When the last method is called getSQL, it returns the query. And when it returns that query, I pass it back to this variable. And I have the same exact query, the same exact output. A query was built for me using the builder design pattern. It has the same attributes from the table with the where clauses and the limit clause. If you look at Eloquent, that's what we were doing. We had a where clause which was chained to another where clause, a limit clause, and if you wanted to, you could take out the where clauses and the limit clause and say, look, I want you to build me something without those things. In fact, you could say get, which would turn it into a SQL statement and then run that query and then give you the results. This is the most simplest form of the builder pattern. In the next section, we're going to take this one step further. So there's a problem here. I don't know if you picked up on it, but I'm going to go to my File Explorer, and inside of config, there's a database.php file. And in this one, you'll notice that Laravel gives you the option of connecting with SQLite database, MySQL, MariaDB, and there's an extensive list. Okay, great. Now let's go back to our code. We only give the option of MySQL. If tomorrow we need to switch databases, how would somebody using our very simplified ORM actually switch the database? So let's work on that. I'm going to go to my File Explorer. Inside of app HTTP, I've built a folder called builders. This is where I'm going to put all my builder pattern related code. I'm going to click on this, and there's my MySQL basic example class I created in the previous section. Right now I'm going to right click and create a new folder here. This one I'll call SQL Builder. I'm going to drag my file inside of that. Let's open this up. And I've already corrected the namespace. The goal was that if I wanted to switch databases, I should be able to do that. The only way I can do that is if I create another file in here which caters to MS SQL related code or even SQLite related code. So I'm going to copy this. Let's just duplicate right now. SQLite and create the class. Over here, I'm going to change the name the SQLite. For the sake of this example, right now our point is to understand the builder pattern. So I'm going to keep the rest of the code the same. Granted, the syntax could be different, but for now, let's just keep it this way. Now I'm going to go back to my code. Now if I want to change the database I'm connecting to, all I have to do is comment this code, go to the next one, say new, name of the class. Over here, I can import it in by right-clicking and saying import class. If you don't see this option, all you have to do is install the extension. Click on the extension icon, and there's an extension called PHP Namespace Resolver. It's by Mehdi Hassan. Once you install this extension, you should be able to right-click, import the class, or just use the keyboard shortcut. Now that this has been imported in, I can come here and copy this part of the code, paste that in there, and just with that simple change, now I'm connecting to the SQLite builder class, which is going to give me SQL related code, which is going to give me a SQL query. That's all I had to do. But I have a question. What if tomorrow another developer joins the team and he goes to the SQLite basic example class and says it should say where or instead? This makes much more sense. And he goes and he updates the code at that point. He comes back and says, where are they using it? Oh, they're using it here. Let me change this to where or. Okay, this works. And then he does the same thing here. The code works at this point. But then later on, we have to change the database. Now I comment this out, uncomment this out, and look, now there's an error. There is no where or in that particular database. How can I force the MySQL basic example class and the SQLite basic example class to use the same exact method names? So tomorrow I can just change one line and my code still works. Well, the answer to this is interface. And in case you haven't worked with interfaces before, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. What an interface does is it forces both of these classes to use the same exact method names. This way, tomorrow if someone tries to change the method name on one class, they would get an error right away. They wouldn't be allowed to proceed further. So let's try to put that in effect. I'm going to go to my class, open the File Explorer, and right here I'm going to right click and create a file called SQL interface.php. Let's build this class out. First thing I'm going to do is give it a namespace, and this one you can probably see it. If you're using VS Code, you can see the path here. And then I can come here and say interface. And now I can paste out SQL interface. Over here is where I tell it, look, these are the method names that should be in it. So let's go back to MySQL and we'll see which ones it should have. The first one is this. I'm just going to copy it out. Throw that in there. Next one is this. I'm just going to copy the signatures, which is really the first line you're looking at. And let's do that here as well. And now the last one. So now let's take a look at this again. I've built up an interface, and its job is to make sure that whoever follows this interface has to have these methods with these arguments. And now the benefit of that is if tomorrow one person changes their code, they'll get an error right away saying that, look, the method name you're trying to change it to doesn't exist in the interface. So a few years ago, Taylor Opwell called interfaces contracts. And the reason I imagine he called it that is because if you hire somebody on a contract basis, you tell them, you have to provide me these services. Then tomorrow, let's say for some reason he decides not to work for you or you decide to hire someone else, you can take the same contract and say, look, I need you to provide these services. And if they provide you those services, you can continue to work with them. You don't have to change your operations. Why? Because that person is going to follow the same exact contract. Now that we understand that, I'm going to copy this interface. I'm going to go to MySQL example. And after the class name, I'm going to say implements. And I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to go to SQLite basic example. And in that same class, I'm going to say implement SQL interface. Now you'll notice there's a red line right here. And if I hover over that, it says does not implement all of your method. It's right here that it says it. And the reason for that is a few seconds ago, we had changed this where or. I'm going to do this, hit save. Now when I scroll up, you'll notice that the red line is gone because now I am following this contract to the letter. Okay, I'm going to go back to my controller, leave controller. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to change this back to or where. I'm going to do the same thing here. And now the red lines are gone. And now I can switch back and forth. I can go here and say, well, today I'm not using the MySQL. We'll be using the SQLite. And notice I didn't have to change the rest of the code. It stayed exactly the same. Now my users can continue to change their databases and it doesn't really bother me. This is similar to what Laravel was offering us. Now that you understand this, in the next section, I'm going to tell you about the director. So let's quickly review what we did. We created a MySQL Builder class, and then we created a SQLite Builder class. After creating this, we realized there was a problem. What if one class had a method that the other class didn't? This problem would surface when we would be using this code. So if we switched from MySQL to SQLite, and SQLite didn't have a specific method, this would cause our code to fail. So in order to make sure that both of these classes had the same exact methods, we would have to implement an interface. And we created that interface with very specific methods, which both of the classes must now provide. And the benefit of both of them providing this interface is that now in our code, we only have to change one line of code when we want to switch databases. Now I'm going to show you a class diagram. This class diagram is really just showing what we did. So let me walk you through it. Where it says concrete builder 1, I want you to imagine this saying MySQL builder class. And where it says concrete builder 2 is where I want you to imagine saying SQLite builder class. Because that's what we did. Then we had both of these classes implement an interface. And because we had these classes implement this interface or contract, we know both of them have the exact same method. So we're already familiar with the interface, the concrete builders, concrete builder 2. In fact, you could add another one for SQL Server and it would still work out just fine. So we are familiar with this part of the class diagram. The part we're not familiar with yet is the director, and this part is optional. You can understand more about this in a few seconds. So let me jump back to the code and show you what problem it really solves. Now this query that I've written, let's just pretend it gets the earliest employees that have joined the company. So in this particular case, we're printing that out. But if you look down, there's another method. It gets the earlier joiners. And there, we're also repeating this query. And if you scroll down further, there's a method that gets the reports. And in that report, we're also running this query. Now, a common principle in programming is don't repeat yourself. And in this case, we're repeating ourselves quite often. So let's implement that. I'm going to open my File Explorer. In App HTTP Builders, there's SQL Builder. I'm going to right click on SQL Builder. I'm going to create a new file called SQL director.php. I'm going to create the namespace here, which is app HTTP builders, and then I'm going to create the class called SQL director. Inside of this, I'm going to create a property. Now, in case you're confused what this is, let me show it to you. If you go to the leave controller code, you'll notice something here. We're switching between the MySQL builder to the SQLite builder. In the future, there could be more of these. So in the director, I want to know which builder are you working with. And let's put that in the constructor. So I'll come here and create the construct. And I'm expecting an argument, which is the SQL builder that you want to use. And then I'll save that value right here. Next, let's create the method which is going to hold the query. I'm going to go back to my code and copy this out and paste it here. Now where it says MySQL basic example, it's expecting the builder. I'll write that down, this SQL builder. Let's review what we did. We're expecting a SQL builder. Are they using the MySQL builder or are they using the SQLite builder class? Whichever one they're using, we'll get a reference to that object and we'll save that reference. Later, when we need to run the query, we'll take that object and we'll run our query. Next, we'll just return this statement. We can come here and just return it directly. And now we can copy this code out Let me copy this. We'll go back to our code in leave controller. And here we'll say SQL director. In order to create the new object, it's expecting an argument of which SQL builder class we're using. In this case, we're using this one. So we'll copy this and we'll paste it here. SQL director object. We'll copy this. After creating the object, we'll copy it from there. And now we can replace all of this code with just one line. Let me comment this out. The SQL director, and then the method name was get earliest employees. And now we can save this value into the variable we're expecting. I want you to realize something. We replaced all these lines of code with just one line. And in the future, if we need to change something in the earliest employees, we only need to change it at one location, which is a SQL director class. We only have to change it here, and everybody else using it will get the changes. I'm going to copy this from here. Scroll up. We can comment this line of code out. Paste that there. Also, we need to copy out the creation of the SQL director object. We'll paste it here. And you can see how much more convenient this is now. That's the purpose of the director class. Now, before we wrap this up, there's just a little bit of code cleanup that we need to do. If you go back to our file explorer, you'll notice there's app, HTTP, and builders folder. In the builders folder, in the future, I could be creating more builders, so I could place it here. But in this case, I've created a SQL builder. If you look inside this folder, I've just kind of thrown everything inside of the root SQL builder folder. I could clean this up by right-clicking, creating a folder, and we'll call this providers. Now I'm going to drag my MySQL basic example class inside of it. So the MySQL builder is inside of the providers class. I'm also going to drag the SQLite class inside of the providers folder. Now that I've done that, I need to go inside and update the namespace. So now the namespace is app http builder SQL builder providers. So I'll just make that adjustment. I'm going to copy this here. And now you'll notice there's a red squiggly line underneath SQL interface. The reason for that is it's trying to find SQL interface inside of the providers folder, which it's not there. I'm going to right click and say import class. And now the namespace is there. I'm going to save, do the same thing for SQLite, and I'm going to update the namespace. Once I do that, again, I'll get the red squiggly line. I'm going to import the class. And now since that is done, I need to go back to my leave controller and update the code there. The reason for that is if I go all the way to the top, you'll notice that the namespace for the MySQL builder class and the SQLite builder class is no longer valid. So I'm going to erase this, go to the bottom of the file. I'm just going to right click and say import class. And now the correct updated namespace is there. I'll uncomment this out, right click and import class. And now both of these, if I go back to the top, both of the correct namespaces are there. So there's one thing I want you to notice. Right here, I'm calling the SQLite builder class. I'm taking that object and then I'm passing it into the director. But I have to do this again when I call this in this method. And then I'll have to do it again when I call it in another method. This isn't really efficient. In order to solve this problem, people use the factory pattern. One of the videos that I'm going to create after this one is probably going to be the factory pattern. Once you see that one, we'll connect the dots and this will make much more sense. So if you're confused, we'll solve this in the coming video. Hopefully now you have a much more clearer idea of what the builder pattern is, how it's being used in Laravel, and how you could use it yourself. In the future, I'm planning on creating a video where I use this builder pattern in an actual project. So this way you get much more insight into how you could use it in your future projects. There's something I want you to realize. It takes a lot of effort to do the research, create this stuff, and share that information with you. The least you could do is click on the like or subscribe button. Once I get 50 likes or subscribes, even a combination of these things, then I'll create the next video, which is going to be about the builder pattern and how to use it in a real project. Until then, stay safe, have fun.